Bienvenidos a Disrupt Everything, podcast series by Isra Garcia. Reinvéntate a ti mismo y cambia lo que más te importa.
Hi everyone, in the first live in Instagram. This is the first interview I go live in English in Instagram, and it's a new podcast. And this time I have the pleasure to interview Skye Cleary. I'm all right. My rusty English is all right.
Yep, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So Skye, thank you for being in the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Isra.
For me, it's an amazing pleasure to have international guests, and also, like, I could speak with a philosopher that is being on the Australian Army before being a philosopher. So I think the story gets interesting. So first of all, thank you for being in the podcast. Welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series. Hello, everyone. This time is in English, so it means we have an international guest, and this time is Skye Cleary. Who is Skye Cleary? Skye Cleary is a PhD MBA and is a philosopher and author of Existentialism and Romantic Love, and also co-editor of the new book I have here, which is How to Live a Good Life. One of the topics of my life, I would say, and a really recommended book that I've been reading the last 2 weeks. I have to say that I read when I go to the toilet. I read in small pieces, but really dissecting everything. Now I'm in Buddhism, because they touch every part of the most interesting religions, and also give you like a personal guide. Really, really interesting, the book. Skye teaches at Columbia, Barnard College, Think Olio, and previously at the City University of New York and the New York Public Library. Skye also is the editor-in-chief of the American Philosophical Association blog, and also she's a certified fellow in the American Philosophical Practitioners Association. She was an international equity arbitrager. Sorry for sometimes my English gets tricky. And also, she was a former management consultant and a lieutenant in the Australian Army Reserves. She has wrote a bunch of articles published between Huffington Post, Business Insider, even TED Education. And she won an award for the New Philosopher Writers Award in 2017. I will share with you in the notes all the writings of Skye. I've been reading through some of them. I think the writings are really extensive, and it means the hard work Skye has put in her writing. And she, listen to this. She has a black. That's when I got in love. So. She has a black belt in Taekwondo. Wow. And loves scuba diving. And she's a stand-up for marine conservation and against palm oil. And she loves to drive and dive in Australian water. And she's also really, really, really on cocktails and New York City lifestyle. So we have a pretty, maybe I missed something, but we have a pretty eclectic profile. And Skye, I would love to start by, if you have a timeline with your highlights from 5 years old to now, how would this timeline look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, especially in light of the fact that you've talked about a lot of the things I've done already. And so from 5 years old, wow, that's a stretch back. But I think, getting my black belt in Taekwondo, that was part of my early life. And that was a real challenge and a really long long process. I mean, many, many years. But what's funny about that is that my brother actually started first, taking classes, and we were at the age, teenagers, where we were arguing a lot. And then I realized that actually he could beat me up because I was the older and stronger one. And so I kind of thought, okay, well, I better get in on this too. So I started learning Taekwondo as well. And then we realized we could really hurt each other. And our relationship has been amazing ever since then. So yeah, I think Taekwondo and yeah, as you mentioned, I went through officer training in the Australian Army Reserves while I was at college. And I found that to be an incredible experience and got to meet so many wonderful people. And I think, and after college, I went and worked in Germany for a year, which I really loved. And I wasn't ready to go home after that. So I came to New York City and worked here for 6 years in financial markets as an equity arbitrage trader, which I loved as well. Then I went back to Sydney and studied journalism for a while. I did an MBA, management consulting, PhD, wrote some books, moved back to New York. And yeah, here I am.
And from a philosopher's point of view, what would you say that has been, or what would be the most appropriate way to sum up your life from a philosopher's point of view? Because I think the change has been like extremely substantial between, consultancy to philosopher, and also in 2020, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, so I guess from a philosophical perspective, I think, I'm an existential philosopher, or existentially minded philosopher. I mean, I don't want to put labels on anything, but existential philosophy has definitely been the focus of all my research. And one of their key principles is that existence precedes essence. So we exist in the world first, and then we create who we are through our choices. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the main existential philosophers, says we are the sum of our actions. And so I guess maybe, like in retrospect, what I'm doing maybe is actually I've never been asked this question before, but trying to, I guess, explore the world and create my being. And Friedrich Nietzsche said, become who you are. And I think maybe I'm trying to become who I am, but I'm not sure what that is yet. So I'm kind of been trying different paths. But even though it seems quite kind of the projects I've been involved in might seem a bit disparate, like as I look back, I think, I'm doing writing now, whereas I studied journalism for a little while, and I didn't realize that I didn't want to become a journalist at the time, but now I'm finding a different way to combine, my writing and my philosophical interests in I guess new ways. And I'm, just trying to find or trying to discover a meaningful life, I guess.
What will be your definition for a meaningful life? Because I think now is the really interesting time to define and describe what will that meaningful life looks like in 2020 on quarantine.
Yeah, and I think this is really tricky. And I mean, for the existential philosophers, there's no strict prescription. The formula for a meaningful life or a good life is going to be different for everyone. But I guess they do have some guideposts that suggest that, a good life is one that's lived in authentic ways. So what that means is that we create meaningful relationships with other people, one's authentic relationships, which are based on, reciprocity and respect and acknowledging one another's freedom. But also that we do things that are meaningful for us. and sometimes we don't know what's meaningful until we go out and try something and throw ourselves into it and try new things. So, I mean, I think how existentialism changed me, or what it challenged me to do, was to think more authentically about what I was doing. And I guess I found in my early life, I was kind of going along this path, you know, doing what I was expected to do in many ways, like going to college, having a career. I worked in finance, and it wasn't until my MBA that I really that was when I really came face to face with philosophy. Now, I'd studied some in my undergraduate degree, like years before, but that was just a year, and it was mostly analytical philosophy, and it didn't really grab me. And so in my MBA, I did it at Macquarie University, in Australia, where they have some philosophers on faculty. And so some of the subjects I took there were like organizational behavior and foundations of management thought. And these kind of subjects provided a philosophical foundation to management and thinking about relationships. And that's where I first really came across existential philosophy, and it really kind of captured my attention and imagination.
What is in existentialism? What is there for us? So what would you say? Because now we live in a time that we are lost from a value and principles perspective. We don't know where to go because we never thought about our value system, our virtues. So what have you found that has captured, and what is there for us? You wrote a book called Existentialism and Romantic Love, that we will get into romantic love, because I would love to see the difference between both of them, but it will be another question.
Yeah, so existential philosophy is based on the idea that, Friedrich Nietzsche said, God is dead. And he said that back in, I think, the 1800s sometime. And what he meant was that we used to live in a world where religion provided the foundation and the guidance for, everyday life. But he realized that people weren't really, even if they were religious, they weren't really living in a religious life, and religion stopped making so much sense back, this was a couple of hundred years ago. So I guess one of the reasons why existentialism is so popular, and there's still books coming out, is because people are still grappling with this idea that, maybe there is no God, or even if people are religious, it's like God doesn't give a prescriptive meaning for what to do in life, and so so the question then becomes, well, how do we live? How do we get along with other people? How do we face the absurdity of existence? Because sometimes the world does seem absurd and meaningless. And so the existential project, I guess you could say, is how to infuse a life with meaning when there doesn't seem to be any foundational given meaning. I mean, we're thrown into the world. We don't choose to be here. We kind of arrive without a guidebook, or there are some guidebooks, but they're kind of unreliable. And so the question is, what should we do then? And like I said, existentialism isn't so prescriptive, but it does give us some ideas about how to. The emphasis is primarily on freedom. So they say we're free to create who we are. And in fact, Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the main existential philosophers, says that we're condemned to be free. And when we talk about freedom, we need to acknowledge that there's freedom, two types of freedom: freedom from and freedom to. So the important thing in life is to be free from things like oppression, and be free to act in ways that are meaningful for us. Okay, the problem with freedom is that it can't just be a matter of, everyone's free to do whatever they want, but rather with freedom comes responsibility, because we don't exist completely independently. We exist in societies and communities with other people. Not only do we have to take into account other people in our decisions, and we're responsible for our actions and the consequences of our actions on other people, but we're also tempted to sometimes evade our freedom and pretend, oh, we didn't have a choice, or it wasn't, I didn't have any other options. And the tendency to want to do that is what the existential philosophers call bad faith. So I think one of the key things about existential philosophy is that it acknowledges that anxiety is a key part of life, because it's scary to conceive of ourselves as free and responsible for our actions. But the benefit for doing this is living authentically, and authentic living is about deliberately choosing what's meaningful and important for you and what you think is right.
So in some point, existentialism has some connections with Stoicism, because it's all about accepting that. So in order to be free, you have to accept what you have, right? Am I wrong, or just so? So can you elaborate on what will be that guidelines, or that no guidelines that are guidelines on the existentialism to carry a good life? Well, a part of authentic living and bad faith and accepting anxiety of part of life, what would you say is necessary, or for have this meaning on you and also this freedom that sometimes is elusive, like we think we are free, but we are no longer free. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and so I think this is, an interesting area especially for existentialism, but also for modern science, because, to what extent do we have free will? And this is like an ongoing debate in, science and philosophy. So the way I think is interesting to think about it from an existential perspective is, so this is specifically Simone de Beauvoir's philosophy that I'm talking about here. And she talks about how there's kind of two parts of being. There's facticity and transcendence. So facticity, they're the facts of our lives. That's the fact that we're born into a certain situation, into a certain family, with 2 legs and 2 arms, certain bodies, certain genes. Okay, but what the existential philosophers are particularly interested in is transcendence. So that is what we do to overcome the given of life, the facts of our situation. So we can just go through life like going with the flow, just being pushed around by external forces or following our impulses. But the existential philosophers would say, well, that's makes us no more really than animals. And so the human nature, human nature is a difficult topic in existentialism, but if there was such a thing as human nature, it would be the desire to stretch ourselves forward in the world. Okay, but we're not all radically free to do that. And so, from a scientific perspective, what's interesting is what are fixed parts of our being. But also, I think in science, we're getting into like neuroplasticity and things like that, which I think is a really interesting area for overlap with existentialism. To what extent can we rewire our brains in certain ways, or overcome the innate impulses that we have in our life? So I guess there's the biological perspective on freedom, but there's also an aspect, I guess, of privilege. If you are born into, a certain context of society, people have a lot more options open to them than many other people. So Simone de Beauvoir talked about how, yes, we're free, but there are restrictions on our freedom, such as ignorance. Like, how can you exercise your freedom if you're not aware that you're free? Or poverty, there's certain restrictions that funding has on what you can do. Or oppression. certain groups are still oppressed. Women have been oppressed for a really long time, and so certain options were very limited for many people. So yeah, I guess that's a long answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer though, which gave us also context and background. So, and then it comes love, which why? And I'm asking you the same question that you are covering a topic on that why do we love?
This is a really good question, and there are so many different answers. And the TED talk, it gave 5 different views on the subject, and it kind of indicated towards my favorite, which was the existential view. So, I mean, some people think it's all about, propagating the species. It's like you fall in love to have babies, but that doesn't explain why some people love each other without wanting to have babies, or some people have babies without loving each other. Some people talk about it as, the chemical, dopamine or pheromones, like in your brain. So I think so, and this was the key question that kind of underpinned my existentialism and romantic love book. And I was like trying to think about, is love a choice? Because it seemed like it seemed to me like you couldn't really choose to fall in love, but it seemed very easier to choose to fall out of love. So I was trying to kind of untangle, the mess. I mean, you couldn't choose to fall out of love immediately, but it seemed like a sort of an easier process. And so I guess, and out of that book, I guess I discovered that love is shaped by so many things. So, yes, it may involve, chemicals in the brain, but also external things like what family is telling us to do, what friends are telling us, what we're seeing in pop culture. And kind of the problem was that often what we want out of a relationship gets very clouded by all these other pressures on us. And I was, experiencing that in my own relationships. When I was doing an MBA, I had a boyfriend who was like getting angry at me for wanting to study instead of hanging out with him. And I was like, well, are they mutually exclusive? How do I reconcile both these things? And so one of the key questions underpinning my research in that area was a question I came across by another philosopher, Irving Singer, who said, what you give up in love is compensated by the love you receive in return. So it seems like there's the sacrifice to love, but the love you get compensates. And this question just frustrated me a little bit, because I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, how much of your life should you give up for love? Or what's the equation? And
what have you found out?
So I found out that it shouldn't have to be an either-or situation. You should look for people who support your flourishing and support your goals and your dreams in life. And this is where Simone de Beauvoir's philosophy came in helpful, because she talks about authentic love. And she says, authentic love is a mutual recognition of 2 liberties. And what she means by that is that it's relationships, if you come together as equals, and if you respect each other and have a reciprocal relationship. It doesn't mean it has to be like, oh, well, I cooked you dinner tonight, so you need to cook me dinner tomorrow night. It's not like that, but it's just that both people are contributing to the situation and being generous to each other and supporting each other towards goals that aren't, you don't necessarily have to have the same interests and same goals in relationships, but I think the best ones are where you can come together and act like almost, well, not almost, but with a foundation of friendship. And I think that if you can get that in a relationship, then, those crazy feelings of infatuation and lust, they come and go, but what's going to solidify the relationship is working towards things, having common goals, working towards things together and supporting one another.
Living, I would say, like living in the same vital moment, right? And also creating for each one like a vulnerability space where you can go and be your, these hard children of 10 years old, the 10 years old children that was hurt. So having that vulnerable space to share this with other person will it help, right? It will help.
Yeah, having a vulnerable space. Yeah, and I think that's true. And I mean, being able to be open and honest with the other person, I think is really important. But it's, I guess I would also say that it's not, there's not one size fits all. There's no specific formula that's going to make for a good relationship. But it's up to the people in the relationship to work it out together. And that's why, I guess in the book, my main argument is that we need to be free from expectations and ideals about how we should love, and free ourselves from being slaves to our passions, like being addicted to dopamine or trying to control or possess the other person, or suffocate them by holding them too close. So if we overcome those things, then we're going to be free to create more authentically meaningful relationships together.
And Skye, what is one question I've been pondering for years is what also the topic you cover in the book is romantic love. So it's been a fuss with this romantic love because people just got carried away. People just love so much that go carried away anyway. So I mean, it's just, so what is from your experience and your research, what is romantic love in 2020? How or what it is, what it means, romantic love in 2020, and how can we behave if this movement makes any sense?
So I think, romantic love, I think, is, an intimate connection with another person where you, I think where you indicate yourselves together in the future. Because if you're just here in the right now and focusing on the moment, then that's what you're really doing, is focusing on a fleeting relationship, or one night stand or something. So so romantic love specifically is, yes, maybe it encompasses that passion, but it also is about a future together. And in fact, that's what differentiates it from relationships in the past, because most relationships used to be arranged marriages, and you didn't marry the person who you're in love with. But then after, I guess, we had the romantic period, and courtly love started to change the dynamics, and feminism, giving women a choice in the matter as well, and not treating women as property, and the rise of capitalism, which values individual liberties, supposedly. But this is these kind of changes in society to where we are now. This has meant that, it's great that we're free to choose who to be with now, and which is something that we haven't had so much in the past. Or some people had it, but it was mostly the privileged people. So, I mean, I think as far as relationships go now, I think we're really lucky that we have the opportunity, or more opportunity, to choose who to love. I mean, it was only a few years ago that same-sex marriage was legalized in the United States, which is crazy. It was just so recently. But I think that's great, not because I'm particularly a supporter of marriage, but I'm a supporter of choosing people choosing the types of relationships they want, as long as it's adult and consenting and all that sort of thing, but being free to create the relationships that work for us. And what I also am, I guess, pleased to see is the breaking down of the romantic ideal, like in a lot of pop culture. We went through a phase where, over the last 20 so years, where, we had all these Disney movies and Hollywood romantic comedies where it's all about, finding the one, falling in love, getting married and living happily ever after. But the problem is that, there's hardly ever just one person. I mean, there's no such thing as a soulmate. And, relationships are hard. So it's not, a smooth road to happiness once you do find the person. And, an ever after is like, it's really hard to create a relationship forever after. And it's not necessarily the right path for a lot of people. I think it was... I forget who said it, but she said every woman needs 3 men in her life. One when she's young to have great sex with, one to have babies with, and one to grow old with. Now, ideally, you want all of those people in one.
Wow.
But that's what we've grown to have a lot of pressure on romantic partners to be everything for the other person. Whereas previously, you had, your husband to have babies with, but you had friends like. And so you had different people, like a much more communal, or you just had much more community around you. But now there's just so much pressure in that one person. And so I think one of the problems is that we think that because we break up with someone, that it wasn't true love or it wasn't meant to be. But I don't think that's true, because, we go through life, we meet people, we do things together, and if paths separate, I think it's great that we have that option to separate and go our different ways. And one of my favorite quotes is from Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, he talked about relationships being like 2 ships coming to rest in a harbor. And, they had a great time, but then, they took off on their journey again, and the wind and the seas like pushed them in different directions. And he says, we shouldn't be sad about that, because we had such a great time while we were together. We should appreciate that. So yeah, I think that's acknowledging that those freedoms that we do have is great, but also recognizing that just because we fall in love doesn't mean that it's smooth sailing from there. We have to work for harmony in relationships.
You said fall out from love, right? Which it just remind me. Alan Watts talks about he talks about love, and he says, it's always an idea on the fall. You fall in love. You don't rise into love, right? So you fall. It's the idea of the fall, right? It's what gets crazy about the terminology we use to address love, because it's always an attachment, and a strong attachment. And this is why I think the philosophy gets really interesting when we talk about love, because at the end everything is an act of love. Hate is an act of love. Like when you struggle with your brother, when you fight taekwondo with your brother, it's an act of love. But this strong attachment is what is really sick, make us sick. And if we don't detach from that, we are seen as love, but we never practicing, right? Mm-hmm. So that attachment leads to my next question. My next question, which is philosophy today. I mean, it intrigues me. So 2 questions here. When you become a philosopher, and how is living like a philosopher? Well, 3 questions, in fact. And how is philosophy like a form of life today? How shaped your life?
Yeah, so I think so what I guess in my life, when I maybe classified myself as becoming a philosopher, I still struggle with those labels. Like I feel like it's like and this is one of the existential ideas, that we're always becoming. So I feel like I'm always striving towards being a philosopher, but it's a receding goal. But I guess I started on my journey, I would say, during my MBA, when I was introduced to existential philosophy and kind of to evolve that into a PhD. And I mean, what it means to be a philosopher today, well, I think for me, I guess I realized that, I talk about this in the How to Live a Good Life book, that, there is, philosophy isn't a life hack. It's not going to tell you specifically how to live a good life, but what it will do is give you kind of an opening or a gateway to reflecting on how you should live. And I mean, the premise of the book, How to Live a Good Life, is that if you have some idea about how the world works, so that's a metaphysics, and if you have an ethics, which means that you have an idea about how you should behave towards others, then you have a philosophy of life, even if you're not fully cognizant of it. And the reason for that is most of us were born into families that had some kind of, even if it wasn't necessarily religion, they had some kind of values and morals that they instilled in us from the beginning. But the issue is that most people don't reflect on whether the philosophy that they have or the philosophy that they're living is a good one. So this is why we started writing this book and talking about how philosophy kind of changed our lives, and how it, I guess, and how it changed other people's lives as well. And so I think some of the key things I learned were, first of all, which is something I've alluded to already, that, society channels us into certain paths that we should be cognizant of. For me, it was that kind of romantic ideal culminating in marriage that was a big one. I think the second thing that's been really influential in my life is this understanding of authentic love, as, not being possessive or demanding or dominating, but figuring out goals together and supporting one another. And I think the third way it's influenced my life is that great friendship is kind of a model we should be striving for in all relationships. Which means respecting the other person in their freedom. And it doesn't actually mean being tolerant. Friedrich Nietzsche has this great line, and he says, let your pity for your friend conceal itself under a hard shell, and you should break a tooth biting on it, and then it will have delicacy and sweetness. It's like tough love, right? But I think I really love that, because what he's saying is that like a really good friend is one who challenges you and pushes you to be a better person. And it doesn't mean being an asshole. And, the world needs like a lot of support, and it needs all the love it can get at the moment. But I think there's something to be said for, being honest with friends and being supportive of them. And and I'll just say that, I guess the final thing is that, one of the metaphors I love is that relationships are a bit like gardens. So they need to be tended to, they need to be nurtured. And sometimes, a storm comes and messes it up or something, and, you need to repair it. But, relationships are something that evolve, and that can be forums for flourishing.
And you say that like three things that really grab my attention. One is how do we reflect? How should we reflect from your philosopher's point of view? And once you've written the book how to live a good life. And yeah, that will start with this one.
So how to reflect? Well, yeah, I think reading philosophy is a good start, or philosophizing. So it's about introspecting. It's about questioning ourselves, questioning our ways of being. So I think I want to say it's living in question, if if I can say that, and questioning received wisdom, questioning automatic thinking, and thinking critically about the world. And in fact, we need that now so much more than ever because of fake news that's around and people discounting what experts and research say. So kind of filtering through all the noise is like a really valuable skill, and philosophy is something that can help us answer that. And that's in fact that's one of the goals of the book. It was to how to live a good life, was to kind of help people reflect on their own lives by maybe they have a philosophy of life but they're not sure which one it is, and these they can think about which one kind of fits with their values or challenges them to think about other ways of life, and not just challenge them to think about other ways, but understand other ways of life as well. Because I think if only we could understand one another's ways of life better, and I think it would help us be more empathetic and more compassionate. And yeah, we certainly need that in the world today.
Is there any set of questions you put into place to question yourself or to reflect?
So I guess off the top of my head, I guess the big existential question is, why are we here? Who are you? Or, I think, who are you is an interesting one, because it's like, we're always changing and growing and becoming. So it's not just who are we now, but, and who are we now is like the sum of our past actions and what we're doing now, but who do we want to be in the future? How do we want to, who do we want to become? Jean-Paul Sartre says, we're never complete until we're dead. And that's kind of bleak, but the point is that we're always, evolving, and we're never finished evolving until we're, until we're dead. And so it's important to think about our life in terms of an arc, and know that, okay, we may be defined by our past actions, but that doesn't limit who we can become in the future.
So the question itself will be, who are you and why are we here? Are those the questions who has helped you, which have helped you to evolve?
Yeah, I think so. And who do you want to become? But also, these questions I've just realized is they're quite, they're very introspective, or very focused on the individual. But I also think it's really important to ask, how should we treat other people? Ideally with kindness and compassion. And that's why I'm kind of also attracted to philosophies of like Buddhism and Confucianism. But an existentialism is especially Simone de Beauvoir's existentialism. That's part of that, acknowledging that we live in a world where other people are there, and we need to take that into account when we're pursuing our goals.
I'm contacting you thanks to Massimo, which I say thank you and hello, who I interviewed before. Massimo Pigliucci, and he's really active on Stoicism. So I guess you've been in touch with Stoicism in writing the book, in the editing. So what's Stoicism for you, and what will be your personal guide, or like the things you apply from Stoicism, or that if any thing has helped you, what things have helped you and how?
So I guess so I'm not a practicing Stoic. I don't like taking cold showers. I know that's one of Massimo's practices. I'm not very good at fasting. Well, I mean, I might answer this question by talking about how, existentialism and Stoicism are often, pitted against one another as opposites. But in fact, one of the reasons why Massimo and I became friends was because we started getting into these discussions and saying, oh, they're not as yes, there are really important differences, but they're not as completely different as a lot of people think they are. So for example, I mentioned the existential idea that existence precedes essence, and in Epictetus he says something like, first tell yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you need to do to get there. And
there's a Handbook of Life opens with this quote.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's very, they're kind of similar ideas, like choosing where you want to go. And so there's certainly it's complementary in that respect, but, there are lots of differences as well. I guess the passions are one example. I mean, you have Marcus Aurelius saying, don't forget wine is just grape juice and sex is just friction between private parts, and trying to discount sexual relationships. Now, I know that Massimo would say, well, that's because he loved those things so much. He was trying to rein himself back in. But the existentialists, on the other hand, really, they emphasize the passions, and they say, desire plays like a really key role in understanding who we are, and it's a way that we connect with other people, and not purely passions, but passions in concert with reason. So I guess they're a bit more balanced on celebrating the passions, and maybe sometimes they celebrated it a bit too much, because they were quite famous for Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir were very famous for hanging out in jazz clubs and drinking cocktails and that sort of thing.
Well, we can say they enjoy life, right?
They certainly did enjoy life. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong, right?
No, I don't think so either.
Not at all. So after the experience you've had writing these two books, and of course the last one, How to Live a Good Life, how can we choose our own philosophy and with this a lifestyle? What will be your suggestion on how we choose, on what will be our, and there is no ideal philosophy, but let's say that we are gonna build a philosophy that works for everyone. Like, what will be the common, like the most common principles of this philosophy?
Yeah, so that's a really hard question, because there are lots of people with lots of different ideas about that. And, in a way, the existentialists aren't very helpful with that, because it's like, well, no, you've got to choose for yourself. You've got to work it out for yourself. But, I mean, there are, I think, lots of some ideas in the How to Live a Good Life book, like effective altruism is one of the philosophies that's kind of based on utilitarianism, which is the idea that create the morally right choice is the one that creates the most good or the most happiness for the greatest number of people, and emphasizes the consequences of our actions. So that Kelsey Piper, who wrote the chapter in our book, she's saying, well, so the goal is to do as much good as we can, work in fields where we can make the most impact to create a better life, and join in communities where we minimize harm. And so, there are other philosophies like ethical culture, which is very much focused on social activism and justice, and I guess developing goodness in yourself and other people. So I guess, Aristotelian and Stoicism kind of develop these same kind of principles. So, I guess it's, I think the key thing underpinning that was, well, how can we exist in the world and be good to ourselves and be good to other people?
That's the key question.
And, yeah, and so there are lots of different, it's like saying, well, which political system is the best? You know, there are lots of different choices. Some of them aren't, you know, the ones that we thought were the best choices aren't necessarily working out as the best choices in many ways. So yeah, and it's really, I mean, I think it's going to be really hard, but like a lot of the philosophies, I think a good philosophy is one that emphasizes, you know, moral goodness in ourselves and behaving ethically towards others and acknowledging others, respecting them. But, you know, the way you do that, and most of the philosophies in the book, or all of them, have, you know, elements of how they think you should go about doing that. So it's going to be really different depending on which aspect you come from, and also depending on how you were brought up and you know, your situation in life and your goals. So
it's really interesting because the more I talk with, I've talked with some sages, I talk with some Zen masters, with some shamans, with philosophers, and all the questions and all the interviews and conversation has one thing in common: is values and principles. All they share this same thing, or virtue, as Stoics call it. But it's just this value system, which is the morals, the ethics, or how you treat other people and how you treat yourself. And this is the key. And because you were saying about this, and I was crossing all the conversations suddenly, and said, everyone just gets on this point. And Skye, what's your you've been like in the army, and also being consultant. What have you learned, which that has impacted you on the army, and also being a consultant, and also in capital? What would you say will be your one or two big like key learnings on each part of your life? I would say, or it's a story, right? It's a chapter.
yeah, I think what I learned in the army is that it's better not to have one. So as in, it would be better if no one had them. Like, let's ban weapons. Like, that would be amazing. Like, so yes, I had a great experience. I learned so much with navigation. I made great friends. And, you know, I guess so one of the second learning is about relationships with other people. And I think some of those relationships were really special because, you know, it put you in these extreme situations, even if, I mean, for me, it was only ever simulated, but, you know, you're in these extreme situations and, you know, your life relies on other people. And it builds, you know, a really solid, I guess, camaraderie and a solid respect for other people in your team. So I think, you know, that the friendships that I built, or it helped me really solidify and understand like the importance of friendship and how we rely on other people. I guess in finance, I guess I learned that money isn't everything, but, you know, you got to have a bit, and I'm very privileged that I had that experience and had that foundation. But, you know, up to a certain point, it's and I think there's been research done on this saying, you know, once you get to $70,000 a year or something, I mean, maybe not in New York City, but once you get to a certain level, then your happiness doesn't increase beyond then. So, you know, I guess I realized the importance of having, you know, enough to get by on. But, you know, one of the reasons I left finance and went into philosophy wasn't for the money, because don't ever do that for the money. But it was to pursue a more meaningful life.
And thinking, well, it was any learnings on consultancy, like can you apply right now, or has helped you like?
I think management consultancy actually really helped me with my confidence in being able to see. I guess during my MBA, I learned a little bit about a lot of things, And in my management consulting world, I was able to, I guess, I built on that confidence that I knew a little bit. I knew that I could go and do more research and find out more about that thing and come back with some recommendations and suggestions. So I think, it really helped solidify confidence in myself, because I had a breadth of knowledge, even though it wasn't very deep, but I knew that I could kind of talk to other people and draw on experts, and and the importance of like going to experts to illuminate me on things I didn't know. So I think that's something that I continue to do now.
And finally, before going to the rapid fire questions, what lessons you find really useful from being a black belt in real life?
So, I mean, I'm very rusty on that now. But I think it's nice to, I think I'm not sure. Just sticking with things. And I think that was besides school, which you have to do, I think it was the first kind of long-term project that I dedicated myself to and really put in, a huge amount of effort and sustained effort. And it took many years, but I got there in the end. And I think having that in my life, or early in my life, helped me go on with other things. For example, go on with my PhD, which was, again, 5 years long. And, I felt like giving up multiple times, but then, I just kept going, and I thought, fine, I may come to the end and I'll submit it, and maybe I'll fail, but, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So that's the Stoic in me coming out, I think. So just helping me have the tenacity to keep going with things that are really hard and take a long time.
So somehow build self-discipline, which is key for everything, right?
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
So let's go for the rapid fire questions. What will be the item for the most valuable item you have right now?
So that would be my mother's paintings. So my mum is a botanical artist, and she's really good, and she's one of the best botanical artists in the world. And I'm not just saying that. I have a couple of her. Yeah, I have a couple of her works. So they're the most valuable things to me.
What's your weirdest habit? What is the weirdest habit you have?
Weirdest habit. Weirdest habit. This is getting very personal, but I sleep with a teddy bear next to me. And it's a teddy bear that I've had since I was a child, and it brings me great comfort still.
Yeah. What's the podcast you've listened the most?
So that would probably be one called Philosophy Bites, which is a specific philosophy podcast. It's got, hundreds of, I think it's maybe 500 episodes or something, and they're quite short, so they're 20 minutes long, and so they're very manageable and with great experts, and the interviewers, David and Nigel, are amazing.
What's the book you've gifted the most?
Gifted the most? Probably, let's see. Lately it's probably, I want to say, can I say recommended the most? Because I don't know. Yes. Okay, so lately it's been called Down Girl by Kate Manne.
Okay, can you repeat, please?
Down Girl by Kate Manne, The Logic of Misogyny. And so it just came out maybe a year or two ago. And it's it's an analysis of misogyny and how it persists and why it persists and how it explains some of the behavior of some of our political leaders. That's a really terrific book.
What's the thing you feel most proud of?
I think it would be my writing. I find writing very difficult, but I also love it. I forget who said, I hate writing, but I love having written. And I think I think I'm the same. I find it challenging, but so rewarding.
And what's the thing when you think about success? What's the first person that comes to your mind?
When I think about success, I don't know. I guess the first person that came to my mind was my son. He's 10 years old, and I'm like, wow, I've brought him up to 10 years old without any major catastrophes. So that for me is a big success, and he's a lovely kid. So,
what would you say is has been your biggest failure?
Failure. I think I worry a lot about things, and so I think my biggest failures were opportunities that I didn't take because I was afraid. And there've been a lot of those over the years. I'm still working on it, but So that would be missed opportunities is probably my biggest failure.
Do you have any ultra secret ritual?
Secret ritual?
Yes.
I don't know. I drink herbal tea before bed every night, but that's kind of boring. I don't know. I'm kind of obsessively eating chocolate at the moment, so that's my kind of ritual,
Amen.
I guess.
Amen. What's your favorite quote, or the quote you've quoted the most?
I think it would be that one about Nietzsche and the ships coming together in the harbor to rest for a while and then going their separate ways, and that we shouldn't be upset about that. And I find that so profound, not only when, in all kinds of relationships, and it's helped me to value, relationships that haven't lasted not just with boyfriends, but friends and other people. So, I think that would be it.
If you can rescue just one thing and we are in the end of the world, what will be that thing?
Oh, my son. Definitely.
Of course. If you can take just one take from philosophy, what would it be?
I think that the importance of actively choosing your relationships. And this can be really hard, I think, because there's a quote that you might have heard of and it goes, blood is thicker than water. But in fact, the original quote was, blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. And which means that the people we choose to spend our time with, those kind of bonds are stronger than ones that we were thrown into by default. And I think that's helped me to create more meaningful relationships, because it's forced me to reflect on what I want out of a relationship and how I respect myself in relationships, and to walk away from toxic relationships or ones that were really dragging me down. And to existential philosophies kind of helped me kind of put that into context and realize that there are no kind of a priori duties to the relationships we're thrown into or pushed into.
If you had the chance to spoke in the in the final of a Super Bowl, and you have the chance to speak for 5 seconds, what would you say?
Wow. I think I would say that love is a choice, and we may not be able to choose who we're attracted to, but we can and should choose our loving behavior.
Is there anything else you want to share or add?
Yeah, also do philosophy. I should have added that to the last question. Or read philosophy. Yeah, read lots of philosophy books. And, existential philosophy is a really good place to start.
Where can we find you on the internet, Skye?
I'm mostly on Twitter. So my handle is Skye, SKYE _Cleary, CLEARY. So yeah, Twitter's my main place, but yeah, my books are on Amazon, or please support your local bookstore
Yes,
and get them from there.
And I have this. There is Existentialism and Romantic Love and How to Live a Good Life, who was also written by Massimo Pigliucci and Daniel Kaufman. Skye, thank you so much. Thank you for being in the podcast, being so kind, and sharing your practical wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Isra. This was fun. I really appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you, and stay in touch, stay safe, and the journey continues.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, you have been with Skye Cleary and me. This is Isra, your host in Disrupt Everything podcast series. And yes, the journey continues. Let's do this.
Esto ha sido Disrupt Everything by Isra Garcia. Encuentra el riesgo antes de que el riesgo te encuentre a ti.